Welcome again. Nice to be here, and nice to be here together with such a prominent and varied panel with very different kinds of backgrounds and industries represented. So what we'll do now in the beginning is to let them present themselves. So it's Elizabeth Jeffords from Roche, and it's Lars-Johan Frøyland from the Norwegian Hospital Procurement. It's Petter Risøe from Diffia, and it is Mats Carlin from SINTEF and SINTEF TTO. So they have, I've asked them to use a couple of minutes each to tell about their organizations, and I expect there to be some kind of core message from there as well. So one of the interesting questions now is where will this debate go with people from such diverse backgrounds? But the common question is, of course, how can we bring innovative solutions to the market in this very particular Norwegian context? We might also be discussing the international context. Let's see. So, Elizabeth, please.
Sure. Hi, thanks. I'm Elizabeth Jeffords. I'm the Managing Director of Roche Pharmaceuticals here in Norway. And I am perhaps...
clicker here?
Is it okay? Perhaps most focused, of course, on drug development and drug introduction. And so we talk a little bit about innovation of pharmaceuticals in Norway. Terrific, thanks. And I would just start by this lovely slide. I borrowed it from PhRMA, which is the US trade organization for pharmaceutical companies. And it shows you that the business model of developing pharmaceuticals is actually quite an insane one. It's actually an innovation that any sane venture capitalist would actually run from. It's a long process, and it's incredibly risky. So why do we do it? Well, I mean, the answer is pretty obvious, is that we have a mission to help either save or improve human life. And there's a bit of a typo in this slide, I apologize, but it's a sort of a decade-long look at the contribution of medicines to life expectancy in the early 2000s. And you can see that 73%, or I think it's like 1.2 years, every man, woman, and child due to the introduction of medicines. So obviously they're important, but they're also expensive, right? And it does have a sort of a growing concern or a growing burden on the system. And so if we look at Norway specifically, and I apologize for the tiny font, but you can see here, Norway actually spends the most per capita, and this is adjusted for PPP, so for purchasing power, of all the European countries on healthcare, but is one of the lowest in terms of spend on drugs. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is, of course, as a single-payer healthcare system, we're actually quite efficient at getting lower prices on our medicines, and I think Lars-Johan can probably talk about that. Not just medicines, of course, but also all of our hospital products. But then even accounting for that, we're still quite low, and we don't really believe in or spend on the value of pharmaceuticals. And I think that's a bit of a problem today. That would be my core message. But my core message is also that as we go into innovation in the future, the way we innovate or develop pharmaceuticals is somewhat outdated. In the past, we found a chemical, and we gave it to a bunch of people, and if it worked, we gave it to everyone with a disease. In the last 20 years or so, we've focused more on something what I would call sort of personalized healthcare. And that was more a patient subset, or a sort of this piece here, right? You have one set of a population, or one segment of a population that a drug is relevant for. And that actually makes us more efficient from a cost perspective, but also a safety and an efficacy perspective, that you're only giving it to the people that will benefit from it. In the future, though, we're getting to the situation with functional genomics that we should be able to treat each patient as if they were a patient and not just a person with a disease. But here in Norway, our challenge is that our reimbursement system, our introduction system, has not kept up the pace of the evolution of the innovation in medicine. And we're still in this one price, one process, one drug model. And it's not really sustainable for today, let alone the situation that we have for tomorrow. So I would argue as my core premise that we need to elevate the debate. We need to stop talking about pricing, and we need to talk about value instead. We need to find creative and innovative reimbursement solutions for getting our products on the market. And then we were also having a little bit of a talk right before this. We have an incredible national resource, which is the registries. We have a single payer population. Everyone's treated within one hospital system. As an American, I think the data and the richness of that data is something that could be mined incredibly well, not just for the benefit of sort of human health, but also for our economic prosperity in terms of dealing with health and the costs that it brings. So that's what I have.
Thank you. Lars?
Thank you. My name is Lars Frøyland, representing a new company called Sykehusinnkjøp Procurement Hospital. We are a group purchasing organization for all the public hospitals across Norway. And will this work? Wow, yes. First of all, focus on the distribution of my organization. We are well distributed across the country with all the red dots in the map indicated where the procurement professionals have their bases. And you can also see the 4 healthcare regions indicated with the different blue colors. So this procurement organization was set up by this year by the Ministry of Health and Care to professionalize and to be more forward-leading as a procurement organization. And we will work to develop the procurement function and the procurement support to the hospitals in dialogue with the market and with market players as Roche and others for the pharmaceutical part of the market. We also work with other markets, of course, the medtech market, and all markets covering the hospital. For my few minutes, I would like to focus on what we have as a system on access. It's under debate, and I know players like Roche and others are heavily interested in debating the system, but this is what we have currently. And I just want to have a few lines on the system for today. It is a system for the introduction of new technology for the hospitals, the special healthcare. And it is to ensure that new technology meets the needs and is sustainability for the healthcare system, the Norwegian healthcare system. This system is set up differently from country to country across Europe. So I think all countries are struggling to find the system for the future. But as I said, this is what we have in Norway today. And the purpose of the system is to run this health technology assessment to have a better platform for informed decision making. There is a perspective of patient safety included in the system, and there is a perspective of having equal access to new technology for patients. This is quite a busy slide. I will not go through all the lines, but I want you to have sort of the overview of this. So I have this process steps as the last slide I have. The first process is that the industry, the company that have a new idea or a new product they want to introduce to the Norwegian market, have it and there will be an HTA, a healthcare technology assessment around this. And in simple terms, my description is simple. There will be a priority and there will be a decision around this project. Being it, first of all, and now it is for pharmaceuticals, the system is always built for medtech. It's not that developed yet for medtech. And then there is the implementation. So just to share this, and I want you to focus on the website. You can find more information about this and how the Norwegian system is set up. So to complete my introduction, I represent the end users, more or less the payer, the hospitals, that we will benefit from the new products at the end of the day. Thank you.
Well, thank you. My name is Petter Risøe. I'm an MD by profession. I spent 4 years specializing in internal medicine at Akershus University Hospital, which is Norway's largest acute care hospital. And 9 months ago, I went on to lead a small startup called Diffia. And we produced something called Nimble, which I thought I'd return to in a moment. But I wanted to start with a little reminder, because I still very much identify with the end user role. And I consider that slightly, I noticed you said you were the end user. I still feel like doctors and nurses are still end users. It's pertinent to remind that healthcare is a decade behind when it comes to digital ICT and health. It's still lots of paper, it's double registration, it's manual typing. When we communicate, it's pagers, it's phones, we still use fax regularly. We have to train all our interns in using fax because no one knows the technology anymore. And we use mail. And this is kind of the key frustration that's very palpable when you work. You spend less and less time with your patient. From around 2004, you saw patients 60% of the time. Now you see them about 45% of the time, and most of the time you end up typing. And physician productivity in terms of DRG has actually declined over the last decade, which is looking towards the elderly wave, not a good thing. So we're somewhat, and once you see it, you see why. Because the more ICT systems we've gotten, the more we've tried to digitize paper and doing it the exact same way. And what worked on paper doesn't necessarily work on a computer. So when I started doing what I do, it's sort of the frustration of becoming society's most expensive secretary. So what we did, and I only briefly touched on this, but we made a clinical tool that helps doctors and nurses save time. And what it basically does, it gives you access to patient information, it provides documentation at the point of care, and it's secure and easy communication, and doing a simple thing like taking a picture, because you can't do that legally today, and you see all sorts of the healthcare personnel using their private phones for this. And of course, like everything else, it doesn't depend on the device, it doesn't depend on OS. We've user tested it at Sunnaas, and as an illustrative slide, we simulated this with a standardized set of tasks. And if you look at the box to the left, this is the average pattern that a nurse walked throughout the shift with a ward with 3 patients. And we measured the time, and we did over 2 months, we did 50 iterations, because we did this user-centric, and we did it with iterative development, and we ended up with a result to write. And this is not innovative at all. This is standard methodology this is how all your apps on your phones are generally made. So we actually started with a fairly different idea, but had to solve something first, because it's so hard to get digital innovation into Norwegian hospitals. And I think that was more or less my presentation. So, and these are just the low-hanging fruits. Our goal is to push this a lot farther down than the 14 minutes.
Yes, sure. You will have to excuse me because I did decide not to have slides, but I will give an introduction anyway to where I come from and my views. I come from SINTEF, which is the largest contract research organization in Scandinavia, about 2,000 employees across a wide range of fields. We do technology for a better society. And what is technology if it's not for a better society, if it's not medtech? I had a group of 37 researchers within smart sensor systems, and when it comes to smart sensor systems, some of these smart sensor systems are, of course, related to medical technology and the biomedical technology in that respect. And we do wearables, we do point-of-care instrumentation, we do a lot of research for health and welfare technology, which is used in the municipalities and so on. I also have a slightly different role in SINTEF, which is in our TTO, our Technology Transfer Office, which heads an operation where we take technology which is inhibited and born in SINTEF and take it out into the society with startups as the main means, or even for some cases licensing to established industry. Currently we have an operation where we have a venture fund of 209 million NOK, where the European Investment Fund is our co-investor, together with Sparebanken Midt-Norge, which is a small bank in the middle of Norway. And what I see as the main thing when you are to succeed with new technology within every field, it's of course about you have to have a team, which is the most important thing. There are three pillars. It's the team, you have to have technology, and you have to have the access to the capital to actually reach to the market. When it comes to the team, it's not only the team which goes out to do these startups. It's really important that you have this team around you of competent investors, that you have a team which is also supplied with the advisors you need to actually know what to do towards the market. When it comes to technology, you have to have unique, proven technology. You have to, when we do startups, we take the technology quite far before we establish the company, because it's a tough game. You have to go, especially when you have technology-intensive startups, you have to have stayer ability. And to be sure that it's the correct technology and to have it verified in the market and technology-wise, you have to go quite far before you start the venture of actually starting the company and getting out. And then, of course, is the access to money, which is in this sector particularly has been quite dry for a period, but it's loosening up now. It's easier these days, especially as Sarsia has been so lucky to have a new fund. It's also, when it comes to the venture capital market here in Norway, it's becoming more mature. And it means that they are getting more professional. It's something about knowing how to rig these companies, to know the rules of engagement and so on. And it's no, I think an important thing here is for these startups to succeed in this particular line of business, it's very important to have very short lines to the hospitals and to the doctors and access to these professionals, which really needs their technology at a very early point. Start to do that. A limitation at the moment is the procurement rules and the things which is needed to develop this technology today. But there are some promising new methods which are sought out. And I think it's very important that we focus on how to improve this innovation. If we look at the Norwegian society, it spends about, I think it's 9 billion Norwegian kroner each year on research within health. And we have to get the most out of these money. And the perspective message from the government really tells you that we have a window of opportunity. It's 13 years until we will not have this money to invest into as deeply as we have today.
Thank you. I think I want to make a suggestion, perhaps a provocative one, I'm not sure, but let's see how you respond. And I would soon give the word back to Lars first. So when the question is how to enter the Norwegian market with no products and services, then we need to ask what's really the problem. And you have mentioned aspects of that in different ways. And Elizabeth was relating to what we now call this discourse on value-based healthcare, which calls for novel ways of evaluating medicine and technology and stuff like that, which is more buzz than reality at the moment. And it has to be related to very different institutional regimes, like in the US and in Norway and Europe is quite different. So when you talked about new methods and the framework for developing or evaluating the quality of devices and medicines, what I suggest is that we have less developed methods for evaluating business models and ways of organizing this into the services. And perhaps this is a more painful point in the Norwegian society than the health technology assessments.
Yes, I fully agree. I think it's painful because the discussion will be quite complex to start a discussion on new pricing models and new way of looking at cost versus value. But I think that is the way and the path we have to go to reach sustainable healthcare in Norway for the future. I think we need to, as a healthcare system, to be able to go from the cost perspective to the value chain perspective. And I think for all parts of the organizations within the hospitals and within the system, it's a challenge. And I think we need to go and discuss this together with the industry, both the pharmaceutical, but also the medtech, all the aspects of industries covering the hospital system to together go the steps forward and have the discussions. I think we will reach upon some legal aspects. I think we will reach, of course, upon some organizational aspects when we start this discussion. But I recognize both across Europe, I don't know in the US, I've not been there so much, but across Europe and also within the European Commission, where I have been to several meetings to discuss this, this value word is some of the fund word of today. And everyone is talking about value-based healthcare, and for my organizations like value-based procurement, we used to focus traditionally on the cost. We now need to be able to look at the value creation of new technology. And that's complex, and that is, we need competence, and we need to play on each other to be able to go this path.
A short follow-up before I leave the words to some of the others. Would it be possible or realistic in a few years' time now to see that it would be that we would have frameworks, regimes, methods for actually experimenting with new business models? Because you represent a very concentrated procurement actor for the whole of Norway.
Yeah, I think, and I think the way forward is to bring together academia and the industry and the payers and the end users, being the doctors or the system. I think we all need to collaborate to really find a way. And of course, we have different interests and we have different aspects and different views on how to go on. Mm-hmm. But I think the dialogue and the discussion have to start now, because the system we have today is not sustainable for the future, for many reasons.
Good. Some of the others want to comment on this? This is a crucial issue.
We have been in the situation where we had 3 hospitals wanting to buy this. But they haven't experienced. They've learned over the years that typically when they procure IT solutions, there is some salesperson there, they make a lot of promises, and when it gets delivered, it wasn't exactly as they were promised. So IT purchases are perceived as risky. And being a startup, we believe in what we do, right? So if we don't believe in it, we should just back up. And we tried to have a dialogue with them discussing how can we make other business models where we take on the risk, which is we're perfectly comfortable with. But you see that once you get out there, and they only know one model. And it's actually a model that makes, they only know the public tender model. So we basically had to circumvent that by pricing it so low because, like you said, there is a perception, and if I put on my healthcare personnel hat, you feel that your needs are rarely solved and probably not communicated to the level where procurement happens. When people talk about personalized medicine, I'm still stunned that when I worked 4 years in the ER, I couldn't get access to generic guidelines. I couldn't, if someone came in with a heart attack, that was blocked. I couldn't get the actual guideline for how to treat healthcare. And they don't complain about much now because now they will use Dropbox. But that's probably not the way it was meant to be. You feel that the needs are not, there's a too big a wider distance from the users to the ones doing actual procurement. So we actually had to just reduce the price so we could get that down to a level where to get that, so they procure at the departmental level, just to make it easier within the framework that they knew. But there would have been sensible to have some forum and someone to discuss, because this could be better for the hospital. We can make sure that they don't pay if they're not satisfied, or that they don't pay if they don't use it, or however you structure it. But we feel that there is no discussion partner on the other side because they know one model, or they're all scared of doing errors. So they end up doing the model they know.
What's first?
Would you say that that is the largest barrier which you meet in Diffia, or are there other barriers which are just as important?
We're in the slightly bizarre situation that everyone is very happy. Everyone thinks this is great. Like the end users, the healthcare workers love it, the department leaders love it, the hospital leaders love it, the ICT department loves it, and it's loved even by the regional health authority. But we feel like you're unable to execute and getting it rolled out and getting it scaled. And there were some technical challenges, but they're not insurmountable at all. It's more about governance and and generally I disagree a little bit with you with working on it very far in the office, because you see a lot of that in healthcare. They spend lots of time planning and doing committees and doing workshops, and what they never do is go out and observe, measure, doing it in the way that startups do, and pivoting. Because even if I know the domain, I'm probably not designing the right solution for a 60-year-old nurse who speaks scanty Norwegian. And the only way I can make sure that what I'm doing works for her is taking it, giving it to her, and seeing what happens, and iterate over it until it works without guidance, and that's getting in. It's an ideal motto: fail often to succeed sooner. So iterating and pivoting and making sure that you adjust needs, and then you have to be there.
But I totally agree about that, just as a comment. But it comes to the technology. Even though you take the technology far before you spin out, you still have to have the contact with the end users, and so on. So it's not opposite view.
But
I guess if I could build on that too, I think what you're talking somewhat is people are uncertain, and they're not sure how to deal with that uncertainty. And unfortunately, uncertainty is probably the only thing we can count on in the future, right? We're going to have so much change. When we were talking before about sort of how do you get something on the market, well, you have to have someone regulatorily approve it, or approve it in some sense. You have to get someone to agree that it has value and want to pay for it. And then, of course, on the end side of the health tech, someone has to be able to use it, right? Your nurse in that situation has to be able to use it. And I think one thing that maybe we should take a lesson from is our regulatory framework in Norway is quite fast and quite good. We've adopted the EMA guidelines as much as possible, but we tend to approve things pretty quickly. Where we seem to get hung up is this evaluating and then the choice of use. And I'm glad to hear Lars saying that we do need to have conversation about this, because I think I would agree that in the future we're going to need it, but I would argue today we need it. So there were 20 drugs evaluated by the Beslutningsforums last year. 10 were outright rejected. 8 were outright rejected. 2 were approved outright out of 20. And then 8 more were approved, but only if they could then go into tender systems. But the tenders for many of these products didn't yet exist and still don't. So then you have a situation where you're left scratching your head to say, okay, if only 2 products out of 20 are really making it through, do we have enough sense of urgency? Do we have enough passion as Norway to try to figure out how to deal with all this uncertainty to make sure that we can take advantage of all the innovation that's there? And I think the sort of most important thing we can do is come together and collaborate, because none of these solutions are easy. You're right, value-based healthcare is a buzzword. It's not a reality. But there are ways to evaluate through health economic analysis, through use of the registry, through looking at real-world data after the fact. There are ways to do that and to balance the risk and balance the uncertainties together.
You wanted to follow?
Yeah, I think the word uncertainty is an important word in this discussion, because I think it's it's reflected both in the system, but also in an individual basis. Going back to the procurement officers you met, I think they are trained to look at the budgets and the legal aspects, legal regulations. And something outside these boxes, they are going to be uncertain, and don't know really how to go forward. And I think the entire Norwegian system on these new methods is uncertain, because the rapid shift and the ongoing development will be even faster in the future. So I think we all struggle in the area of uncertainty, and that is why I think it's important, maybe today, at least for the future, to be able to have discussions and to be able to meet and to be able to develop systems and setups that can be sustainable at least for some years. I think there will be changes during the way. What my organization, the procurement services for the hospital now is trying to do is to go a transformation path internal to educate and train the procurement officers to go from the approach of sort of the legal frames. Of course they are there, but they have not been able to translate them into how to use them into new technology and to new products. We need to train our staff to run dialogues with startups like yours. We need to train them to have the dialogue internal with the physicians, the doctors, the clinical staff, because at the end of the day, and in most cases, these professional procurement guys are those setting up the contracts, and they are sort of in between the seller and the real end users. I agree with the end user's perspective you have. So we have started now already, and we are a new company. We have already, and as one of the first things to do is to train our staff to go from the old-fashioned way of running procurement services to a new one, being more open-minded, being more have the certainty to go into new areas and to new approaches. It's tricky, but we have started.
Thanks. We're kind of running out of time, so I want to challenge the industrial actors here now for a small final question, and you need to be short on this. If you talk about developing industry on healthcare in Norway, in such a publicly dominated system, what can be achieved, do you think? You want to start?
What can we achieve in developing
in terms
a
of
healthcare
developing
industry?
for healthcare in Norway?
I think that there are things that we don't have, like we don't have a huge trial infrastructure, that sort of things, things we wouldn't have unless we had a bigger population. But I think what I do believe from having worked in multiple countries is we have an enormous opportunity in this data set. And we talked about this, it's really hard to get to the data and to make it meaningful, but that to me is, I'm going to use a phrase which we use a lot, but the next oil. It's a national treasure and it should be mined.
Okay.
At the same time, we answered the question, what's the biggest problem? And I would love it if hospitals were able to kind of not start by thinking all the hospital, thinking the entire region, but scaling down, thinking iteratively, thinking scalable. So you start with small, you start in one department, and then they know what they're getting when they're having the procurement dialogue. There are no uncertainties. They've already tried it for 6 months, and they know exactly what they're going. It's no failed expectations. And we have to invest in some infrastructure, technical infrastructure comments for interoperability.
Okay. Mats, last word for the day?
Okay, very good. I totally agree with you about the data which needs to be...
I'm afraid we have to...
Oh, sorry.
Really?
Yeah.
We have reached time.
Sorry for that.
Yeah, okay.
Well, I think we should give a great thank you to Thomas and the panel. From my perspective and experience, I think what you touch upon is very important for people starting up in this business with new ideas and so on. They need to be aware of these challenges that they have to go through at a point. Thank you.